So hello and welcome to OGV TV, and we're very lucky to have with us Sean Buchan, Managing Partner from Ducatus Partners today. So Ducatus Partners, international executive search and leadership advisory firm. Firstly, thank you very much for sponsoring our On the Move section of the magazine this month, and also our new jobs page. Very much appreciated. From our side of things, it's really good to get somebody with your kind of credibility and oversight right across the globe to have a look at what's happening within the recruitment market at the moment. For the benefit of our audience, if I can ask you first off to tell us a little bit about your company, your size, geographical presence, and their capability within the marketplace.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Dan. Yes, as you said, we're an executive search business, leadership advisory business, working predominantly in the oil and gas market. However, over the last couple of years, probably become more of an energy business with a growing presence in infrastructure. In terms of size and capability, we are physically present in Aberdeen, London and Houston. Current staff of about 25, which during the course of 2018, we sort of tripled headcount, particularly busy year. We worked with about 56 clients last year, spread across oilfield services, EPC, midstream E&P. That's probably around 67 appointments at board and executive level. Separate to that, we also did a large piece of project management for a client who moved into new territory in Alaska, and we supported them with in excess of 30 hires, building up a leadership team from scratch. So 2018 was a really interesting year for us, and we're looking forward to seeing what 19 brings.
And in terms of the split between industries, what percentage of your business is focused on oil and gas, and what percentage is focused in other areas?
We're still probably in excess of 80% of our business in oil and gas. The actual demographics of that have probably evolved, with our North American business doing an awful lot of midstream activity last year, and some of the support activities that go towards the US onshore. So whether that be water supply, power supply, lots of demand in that area. Okay.
And from our side of things, and I'm sure from our audience, that it's been a very difficult 4 years for the industry. Very little hiring for growth, and obviously a lot of companies in survival mode. How has Ducatus seen the kind of evolution of hiring patterns change over the last 12 months? And what do you predict for 2019?
Yeah, that's a great question. Certainly our key observation in 2018 versus perhaps 17 and 16, earlier phases of the kind of low oil price. Lots of our activity in the earlier years of the sort of low oil price environment was centered around turning around underperforming leadership teams, companies that were in financial difficulty. I guess the big change we've seen in 18 is the return of strategic hiring. And that's been both in the E&P sector and in the oilfield service sector. So actually companies trying to position for growth, adding in new service lines, trying to build capability, whether it's around decommissioning or digitalisation. That's probably our single biggest factor that we saw in 18, which obviously from a lot more positivity around that type of hiring than there is around turning around businesses that are in distress. And certainly going into 19, we see more of that strategic hiring activity being prevalent, and the continuation of our hiring activities outside of the UK, whether that's mainland Europe, Middle East or Asia Pacific.
Okay. And specifically, in what kind of subsectors of the industry have you seen the most demand recently? And what areas do you feel that there's a shortfall in leadership experience? And how does the industry address that?
So let me start with the what sectors we're most active in. And I'll talk initially about the sort of Europe, Middle East, Africa business, which I lead. Rather perhaps strangely, because it's an area that's had some serious challenges over the last year or two. Probably our busiest subsector at the moment is Subsea. And I think you're seeing the Subsea market positioning for growth in 2020. It still, from a vessel utilisation point of view, is a really challenging market. However, companies that are sort of strong management teams starting to really position for work, whether it be in the Middle East with some current activity we're doing around Saudi Arabia, companies trying to break into the LTA agreements there. That's probably driven a lot of our work. Probably a secondary factor, if you look what's happened in the UKCS over the last few years on the E&P side, the increasing importance of private equity-backed companies and their ability to drive transactions through in this kind of lower oil price environment we've had some spin-off work from that's been fantastically exciting to be involved in. And they look to continue to be an important force in the UK oil and gas sector in 2019.
So despite the fact that the subsea sector is probably one of the hardest hit at the beginning, you're now seeing the resurgence in that market, specifically the overseas part of the subsea market.
Yeah, and I wouldn't overstate it. Some of our clients in the subsea market that are perhaps asset heavy, commercialised deals for new vessels in high oil price environments are having a tough time. But there are parts of that market where there are quite robust companies with good visions for how they evolve their business to be relevant today, whether that's around decommissioning activities, whether that's around building light well intervention capability. But certainly that part of the market for us, whether or not we're a barometer for the wider subsea market, I wouldn't like to say. I think you also asked me there about particular areas or genres where we've seen increased demand. Mm-hmm. That's certainly something, some of it's anecdotal and hasn't yet, I think, fed through into, in the SME environment anyway, a real increase in actual hiring.
And I also asked you about where you felt there was a shortfall in leadership across the industry and how the industry addresses that. I mean, is that something that you can tell us a little bit about and have picked up on of late?
Yeah, I guess you've seen an increase in consolidation, both in the E&P sector and in the oilfield service sector. With that, the complexity of some of our clients' business in terms of the breadth of their service lines, the breadth of their geographies, and the complexity of their business has increased. So when we've been asked to support some of those clients with hiring needs, trying to find somebody that's got a really holistic view of a very broad area of the market has actually been quite challenging.
So what about leadership in some of these new areas that you alluded to earlier on, such as digitalisation, decommissioning, etc.? Digitalisation, cybersecurity is another one, certainly from our side of things, that are relatively new markets for the oil and gas industry where there appears to be a skills shortfall. Would you say that companies are now looking to appoint people on their board to provide leadership in those areas?
I think if you're a major corporate, there's a reasonable chance that that's a discussion that's ongoing. You've seen Petrofac, Aker, Statoil or Equinor as they are now, all appointing chief digital officers over the last 12 to 18 months. I don't think that's yet really materialised into kind of non-executive appointments. It's something that is talked about in the industry but probably hasn't yet materialised into real action. So digitalisation's there. I think you're more seeing clients building their capability, whether it's digitalisation, big data, or sort of automation. They're probably quite common themes right now within our client base.
Okay. And geographically, as an international search firm, what have been the main differences, if any, with the hiring patterns across those areas? And where do you see the specific hotspots over the next few years? So again, going back to 2018, probably for our region, outside of the UK, the key area of activity would have been the Middle East. Dominated by the requirements of Saudi Aramco, but often with us appointing executives in Dubai or Abu Dhabi, but often looking for that expertise in how to partner with Saudi Aramco. I don't expect that to suddenly disappear. They remain one of the largest spenders in oil and gas infrastructure globally, or the largest spender in oil and gas infrastructure globally. Outside of that, we're still working with many Aberdeen companies, but often not on UK requirements. So it's the Aberdeen companies that have been bold and gone overseas and internationalised their business. We're supporting companies right now that are headquartered here in Asia Pacific, the Middle East, mainland Europe. So hopefully more of that. Okay, and over the last kind of 18 months or so, Aberdeen and the UK in general seen an influx of kind of smaller, more agile operator companies, more technologically savvy and taking advantage of a more leaner and flexible approach. Have you seen any patterns emerge in the way that they populate their boardrooms? And are there any lessons for the kind of larger, more traditional operator companies?
Yeah, I think the key observation there would be if you were to look at that E&P community, their boardrooms are all industry executives. If you were to look at public companies, obviously they have a far greater onus on governance, individuals with experience in capital markets. There's no right or wrong answer. I think clearly public companies' governance is huge and probably underpins a lot of what they need at board level. Whereas what we see in that SME environment and that private equity environment, it's not just who's on the board, it's the purpose of the board. They're highly performance orientated as opposed to just purely governance orientated.
So what around, obviously something that's fairly hot topic over the last few years, that kind of gender equality piece and diversity area. Are you noticing some of these companies, the new operators, that are embracing that or not so much? I mean, what's your experience on that side of things?
I don't think I'd pretend that there's an active focus in the private equity and PE community on gender diversity. I think it's hiring the right people with the right skill set, regardless of what that may be. We've seen diversity in other areas, whether it be the demographic of boards. The oil and gas industry still would be, of all the industrial sectors, the lowest represented by females at board level. I think it's 1% of all public companies. So I would say the success of some of those private equity backed companies isn't their board structure. It's the fact that they're far more performance orientated. They've got far more clear lines of sight of their investors and a really clear purpose around what they're trying to achieve. And that's why they've probably been able to execute so much deal activity over the last 18 months.
Interesting. And finally, what are Ducatus' plans for the future and moving forward?
So this year in Europe, Middle East, Africa, interesting, one of our key plans is more appointments for us. We are trying to appoint 2 partners this year in the UK. One focused on the energy sector, probably upstream oil and gas, which again speaks to the fact that we think there's some sort of resurgence ongoing there. And we'd also like to add in a UK-based infrastructure partner to support some of the activities we're doing in North America. We think there's a great interplay between both the infrastructure investors and the infrastructure contracting community, and there's a really nice overlap there with the energy market that we've been able to take advantage of.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us, Sean. OGV TV are delighted to have you here, and we wish you every success with the business.
Thank you for the opportunity, Dan. It's been a pleasure.
No problem at all.